The inhabitants of the Hungry Ghost realm are depicted as creatures with scrawny necks, small mouths, emaciated limbs, and large, bloated, empty bellies. This is the domain of addiction, where we constantly seek something outside ourselves to curb an insatiable yearning for relief or fulfillment. The aching emptiness inside us is perpetual because the substances, objects, or pursuits we hope will soothe it are not what we really need. We don't know what we need, and so long as we live in the Hungry Ghost mode, we'll never know. We haunt our lives without being fully present. That was a passage from the book In the Realm of the Hungry Ghosts by Gabor Mate. I've chosen the topic of addiction because it impacts absolutely everyone. We live in a society where we are surrounded by substances and activities that have the potential to be addictive. And we need to understand the cause of addiction before we can help it. So, what is addiction? Well, a simple definition is the 4 C's. Craving something intensely, loss of control of how often it's used, continued use despite the consequences. This applies to all addictive substances, like alcohol or cigarettes, or an addictive behavior, like technology, gambling, shopping, or work. How does addiction affect the brain? Well, there's a chemical in our brain called dopamine. All pleasurable activities release dopamine in our brain. It gives us meaning, purpose, and belonging with others and with ourselves. When you're with people you love or having fun with your friends, dopamine is released. But over time, addiction-induced dopamine rushes can alter your brain and result in dependency or tolerance of the drug. Behavior addictions like shopping, technology, gambling can have the same effect on your brain like substances like alcohol or cigarettes. Now understanding how it affects the brain, here's a breakdown of the things people are addicted to. According to the CDC, there are 20,000 deaths a year in the US from illegal drugs, mostly from heroin and secondly from cocaine. 25,000 deaths a year from prescription drugs. Interestingly, 80% of heroin users start off with prescription drugs in the US. 85,000 deaths related to alcohol in the US, and 3.3 million deaths worldwide, and 440,000 deaths related to tobacco in the US, 6 million deaths worldwide. However, there is one major drug that the CDC doesn't recognize: sugar. Who here thinks that it is? Well, studies show that sugar activates the same regions of the brain as cocaine, and it is in everything around us, like processed foods, drinks, and even cigarettes. 20% of a cigarette is sugar. At the moment, the CDC links 800,000 deaths a year in the US to type 2 diabetes, which is highly linked to eating too much sugar. So, while there are 20,000 people dying from illegal drugs each year in the US, there are more than 2.5 million dying from legal drugs. Maybe we're fighting the wrong war. But there are also addictive behaviors like work, shopping, gambling, and of course, technology. Technology is now a major part of our life, and it affects everyone, especially my generation. We're almost dependent on it, and I know personally that I can use it too much, and it definitely distracted me from completing this quest. So, now that you have a general idea of what people are addicted to, what causes addiction? Well, back in the 1970s, scientists took rats and put them in empty cages all alone with 2 water bottles. One with water and one with water laced with heroin or cocaine. The rats got addicted to the drug water and eventually died. This made people think that drugs were uncontrollable and addictive, and that has been the accepted theory for decades. However, a psychologist named Bruce Alexander noticed that the rats were bored and lonely and had nothing else to do except use the drug water. So he created Rat Park, which was a big, fun area with lots of other rats to interact with and lots of things to do. Given the choice, the rats didn't choose the drug water. He took his experiment further and got the rats addicted to the drug water. Then he put them in Rat Park, and they slowly came off of it all on their own. The closest human comparison to Rat Park and the rat experiments was the Vietnam War, where 20% of the US soldiers were using a lot of heroin. But when they returned home to the US to their friends and family, 95% of them just stopped. So the empty rat cage was being like in the war, and coming back to their friends and family was like going to Rat Park. So from researching this topic, I think one of the main causes of addiction is the lack or absence of love in someone's life. Not feeling comfort or not being able to attach yourself to something. I think growing up without comfort or love from family and friends, especially after trauma, makes you tend to pick something else to comfort you. And a lot of the time that substance or behavior becomes your addiction. So, and even if you do feel comfort in your life, sometimes your addiction eases you of your everyday duties and responsibilities. For my project, I created a podcast on addiction. I interviewed different people and talked about things in this presentation. And here's a snippet from my podcast.
I work with people who are HIV positive. My client's addiction is extreme, where their days are all about how they will get their next fix, including how they will pay for it. Often they pay for it by stealing, panhandling, and sex trade. What my clients have in common is they have suffered unimaginable trauma, and then they are further traumatized by a system that treats them like criminals. They suffer from the physical pain, which includes withdrawal, daily. One of the hardest things about my job is watching people suffer unnecessarily because of government policies, essentially the war on drugs. Portugal decriminalized all drugs 15 years ago, meaning people who use drugs aren't breaking the law anymore, but it's still not legal to sell. They are now getting the medical care they need. Portugal had the highest rate of drug use, HIV and Hep C, and now it has the lowest.
So, we need to think about addiction differently. The rat experiments, Rat Park in Vietnam demonstrate it has less to do about the physical addiction and more to do with your environment and human connections. Addiction is just one symptom of the disconnection happening all around us now with bigger living spaces, shopping, and technology too. The war on drugs has not worked at all and has resulted in more suffering for everyone. So, how many people here think they have an addiction or know someone that does? So, if we are not experiencing meaningful connection with people in our lives, it is human nature that we will try to bond with something else, whether it's sugar, caffeine, technology, work, alcohol, or even heroin for some. It's not about individual recovery anymore. It's about social recovery as a group. I would like to thank both my parents, my Aunt Carrie, Corrine, and of course, Ibu Nicola and Ibu Jackie. And now to start the social recovery as a group, please hug your neighbor.
Thank you, Chayton.